The Arizona Territory, 1885. Dust and disappointment hang heavy in the air as Thomas Redwater stares at the collapsed mine entrance. His weathered hands grip the deed, his payment for a debt no one else would honor. Locals called him a fool. The white settlers laughed behind his back. Even his own Apache elders shook their heads. 5 owners had already lost everything to this worthless hole in the ground. But Thomas sees what others don't, the ancient stories mapped in stone by his ancestors. Where modern geologists saw random formations, he recognizes Thunder's Spine, the sacred fault line from tribal legends. Could the gold have been waiting all along, just beyond where others stopped digging? Will his ancestors' wisdom prove more valuable than all the mining textbooks gathering dust in territorial offices? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if the story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Thomas Redwater folded the deed carefully before tucking it into his shirt pocket. The paper was worn thin at the creases, having passed through 5 pairs of hands before reaching his own. Each previous owner had arrived full of hope and departed broken. He wouldn't make their mistakes. From the saddlebag of his paint horse, he withdrew an object wrapped in soft deerskin. Unwrapping it reverently, he revealed a map, not the crisp, official-looking documents the government surveyors produced, but something far older. The aged hide was marked with pigments derived from plants and minerals, showing the contours of the land as his ancestors had known it. Generations of Apache hands had maintained these markings, adding details as they were discovered. His fingers traced the line his grandfather had shown him as a boy, Thunder's Spine, a sacred fault where the earth spirits had once battled. Western geologists would dismiss such stories, but Thomas knew better. The elders' wisdom contained practical knowledge hidden within spiritual teachings. You plan on staring at that old thing all day? Or you aiming to get some work done? Thomas turned to see Sheriff McIntyre approaching on horseback, squinting against the late afternoon sun. The lawman's weathered face held the permanent skepticism of a man who'd seen too many fools chase dreams in this unforgiving territory. "Just getting my bearings, Sheriff," Thomas replied, carefully rewrapping the map. "Coals filled your head with nonsense, Redwater. That mine's worthless. Every assayer from here to Tucson confirmed it." McIntyre shook his head. "Benjamin Cole may be a snake oil salesman, but I never figured you for a sucker." Thomas met the lawman's gaze evenly. "I know what they say. Blackwood's men went over this ground with the finest equipment. That man doesn't miss gold. Redwater, you're wasting your time." Thomas nodded respectfully but offered no argument. Samuel Blackwood, owner of the Territorial Mining Company, had indeed surveyed the area extensively before abandoning it. The man's reputation for finding profitable mines was matched only by his ruthlessness in acquiring them. "I've got my reasons," Thomas said simply. The sheriff studied him for a long moment. "Your people need water more than they need dreams, Thomas. That reservation land's drying up, and no amount of digging here will change that." Thomas watched the sheriff ride away, the man's words echoing what he already knew. The reservation's wells were running dry, the crops failing. His people needed practical solutions, not fantasies. But if he was right about what the map showed, he turned back to the collapsed mine entrance. Others had dug straight in, following conventional wisdom. But the tribal map showed the fault line, Thunder's Spine, veering sharply to the northeast below the surface, right where the previous tunnels had stopped. As the sun dipped toward the horizon, Thomas made camp. Tomorrow he would begin clearing the entrance. His modest savings would last a few months if he was careful. That's all the time he had to prove that in this case. Apache wisdom might be worth more than all of Blackwood's modern instruments. In town, Catherine Wilcox lit the lamp in her small classroom, preparing lessons for tomorrow. Through the window, she could see Thomas's distant campfire near the old mine site. The Apache ranch hand was respected for his quiet competence. But taking over Cole's failed mine struck her as uncharacteristically foolish. Still, there was something about Thomas Redwater that suggested depths others missed. In her 3 years teaching at the reservation school, she'd learned to appreciate the subtle intelligence in Apache traditions. knowledge the settlers dismissed as primitive superstition. Catherine brushed a strand of graying hair from her face. At 40, she'd learned that wisdom often came disguised in unexpected forms. Perhaps Thomas Redwater saw something in that abandoned mine that others had overlooked. For now, though, she had lessons to prepare. The territorial supervisor was visiting next week, looking for any excuse to close the Indian school as a waste of resources. Like Thomas, she was fighting her own uphill battle in this dusty corner of the Arizona territory. Catherine closed her leather-bound journal, the pages filled with her observations of reservation life. She'd started keeping the journal when she first arrived in Copper Springs, partly to document her teaching experiences and partly to combat the loneliness that had followed her west after her husband's death. Today's entry described Thomas Redwater's curious venture with the abandoned mine. Something about his quiet confidence intrigued her, standing in stark contrast to the boisterous claims of men like Benjamin Cole, who'd lost the mine to Thomas in the first place. The morning bell rang, signaling the start of the school day. Children filed in, some from the reservation, others from settler families whose ranches were too distant from the main schoolhouse in town. The Territorial Board of Education tolerated this integration only because establishing a separate school would cost more money. Miss Wilcox. Young Sarah Whitefeather approached her desk, eyes bright. My father says Mr. Redwater is going to find gold and build us all new houses. Catherine smiled gently. That would be wonderful, Sarah. But let's not count on such things. Now please take your seat. As Catherine began the day's lessons, she noticed Samuel Blackwood's son, James, whispering to another boy. My pa says that Apache's gonna lose everything. Says that mine's been picked clean. James, Catherine called sharply, would you care to share your conversation with the class? The boy straightened. No, ma'am. Then perhaps you can tell us the capital of Colorado Territory? When James couldn't answer, Catherine used the moment as a teaching opportunity rather than a punishment, guiding the class through a geography lesson. She'd learned that heavy-handedness only reinforced the divisions she was trying to bridge. At midday, while the children ate their lunches in the shade of the cottonwood tree outside, Catherine noticed a commotion in town. Through her small window, she saw Thomas Redwater leaving the general store with supplies, trailed by several men whose mockery carried across the distance. Redwater, when you're done digging your grave up there, I'll give you a job mucking my stables. Catherine watched as Thomas loaded his purchases onto his horse, his face impassive. His dignity in the face of ridicule spoke volumes about his character. Later that afternoon, after dismissing her students, Catherine found herself drawn toward the mine site. She told herself it was merely curiosity about this man who'd captured her students' imaginations. But in truth, she was simply tired of speaking only to children all day. Thomas was clearing debris from the mine entrance when she approached. He straightened, wiping dust from his hands. Miss Wilcox, he acknowledged with a nod. Mr. Redwater, she replied. My students seem quite invested in your mining venture. A faint smile crossed his face. Children still believe in possibilities. And you? What do you believe in? Thomas gestured toward the distant mountains. My grandfather could read these lands better than any geologist with fancy instruments. He taught me to see what's hidden. Catherine studied him. Unlike many men she'd met in the territory, Thomas Redwater spoke without bravado. The children mentioned gold. If I find it, it won't be just for me. His dark eyes met hers. Our people need water, medicine, better schools. Noble intentions, Catherine said, then added carefully, Samuel Blackwood isn't known for missing valuable deposits. Blackwood sees land as something to be conquered, Thomas replied. My people see it differently. Sometimes, the land reveals its secrets only to those who listen properly. The conviction in his voice gave Catherine pause. Perhaps there was more to this venture than a desperate man's gamble. As the sun began its descent, she took her leave. Good luck, Mr. Redwater. The children would be delighted if you proved the skeptics wrong. Walking back toward town, Catherine realized she'd come to share that hope. In a place where Apache people were routinely dismissed as ignorant or backward, Thomas Redwater's success would challenge more than just geological assumptions. The sun had barely crested the eastern mountains when Thomas laid out his mining tools on a worn canvas tarp. Each implement, pick, shovel, hammer, and chisel, bore the marks of years of use. Unlike the shiny, store-bought equipment of hopeful prospectors, Thomas's tools had been maintained through countless seasons of practical work. He ran calloused fingers over the hand-carved wooden handle of the pick, worn smooth from his grip over the years. It had belonged to his father, who had worked the copper mines to the south before tuberculosis claimed him. Thomas had added the metal reinforcements himself, extending the tool's life through his own ingenuity. As he worked to clear the collapsed entrance, his mind drifted to a childhood memory. He was 10 years old, sitting beside his grandfather on a high ridge overlooking this very valley. "See how the rock changes there?" The old man had pointed to a subtle line running through the distant formations. "That is Thunder's Spine, where the earth split open long ago. Our ancestors saw the lightning strike here, again and again, marking the path of power beneath." Young Thomas had squinted, trying to see what his grandfather described. "Is it magic, grandfather?" The old man had laughed gently. "Not magic, but knowledge. The white man's science and our traditions speak of the same world in different tongues. Where they see minerals and geological shifts, we see the work of spirits. But both recognize that such places hold power, and sometimes great wealth." The memory faded as Thomas's pick struck hard stone, jolting him back to the present. By midday, he had cleared enough debris to peer into the abandoned tunnel. The support beams had rotted in places, making entry dangerous. He would need to replace them before venturing further. In town, the evening brought its usual gathering at Fletcher's saloon. Thomas rarely frequented such establishments, but tonight he needed supplies that couldn't wait until morning. As he entered, conversations dimmed momentarily before resuming with pointed loudness. "Well, if it ain't the Apache gold baron," called one miner, eliciting laughter. "Found your fortune yet, Redwater?" Thomas ignored the mockery, approaching the bar to place his order. "Heard you're digging where Blackwood's engineers found nothing," continued the miner, emboldened by whiskey. "What makes you think you know better than modern science?" "Leave him be, Matthews," the barkeeper warned half-heartedly. "No, I'm curious," Matthews persisted, turning to face Thomas directly. "Is it some Indian magic you're counting on? Some spirit guide showing you where to dig?" Thomas remained silent, waiting for his supplies to be gathered. "Maybe he's got a map drawn by ancient braves," another voice jeered, "marked with buffalo blood under the full moon." The laughter grew, but Thomas's expression remained unchanged. He'd endured worse. From a corner table, Catherine Wilcox watched the scene unfold. She had come to collect overdue school fees from several parents known to spend money on whiskey before their children's education. The mockery directed at Thomas made her grip her teacup more tightly. "Interesting," she said, her voice cutting through the laughter with surprising clarity. "How men who've never successfully located gold themselves feel qualified to ridicule someone who's actually doing the work." The saloon quieted as heads turned toward her. "Miss Wilcox?" Matthews touched his hat, suddenly mindful of his manners. "No disrespect to you, ma'am, but everyone knows that mine's worthless." "Everyone once knew the world was flat," she replied coolly. "Knowledge has a curious way of evolving when people bother to look more carefully." Thomas collected his supplies, nodding slightly to Catherine as he departed. The gesture wasn't lost on the room's occupants, who immediately began speculating about an alliance between the half-Cherokee schoolteacher and the Apache ranch hand. Later that night, Thomas studied the tribal map by lamplight. According to the ancient markings, Thunder's Spine veered sharply at precisely the point where previous tunnels had been abandoned. Tomorrow, he would begin digging in a new direction, trusting wisdom that predated any geological survey. As he traced the line with his finger, he thought of Catherine Wilcox's unexpected defense. In his experience, most white settlers, even those who dealt fairly with his people, rarely challenged their own kind publicly. Perhaps the schoolteacher was someone worth knowing better. 3 days of backbreaking labor, had transformed the mine entrance. Thomas had reinforced the tunnel with fresh timber, allowing safe passage to the point where previous owners had abandoned their efforts. Sweat-soaked and dust-covered, he paused to drink from his canteen, calculating his next move. According to the tribal map, he should now angle northeast, perpendicular to the existing tunnel. The previous miners had followed the small, disappointing vein straight ahead until it pinched out. But if his grandfather's teachings about Thunder Spine were correct, the main deposit lay at an angle no one had explored. He was about to resume digging when a voice called from outside. "Mr. Redwater, are you in there?" Thomas emerged to find Catherine Wilcox standing in the afternoon sun, holding a covered basket. "The children were concerned you might be working without proper meals," she explained, though her slight smile suggested the children weren't the only ones concerned. "I've brought some bread and stew." Thomas wiped his hands on a rag. "That's very kind." As they sat on a fallen log outside the mine, Catherine studied the entrance. "You've made remarkable progress. Just reached the end of the old workings," he replied between grateful bites of stew. "Tomorrow I start in a new direction." "Oh," Catherine's interest seemed genuine. "Based on what?" Thomas hesitated, then decided to trust her. "The tribal map shows a fault line Thunder Spine that the previous miners missed. They dug straight. I believe the gold follows the fault line at an angle." Instead of the skepticism he expected, Catherine leaned forward. "So you're combining traditional knowledge with modern mining techniques?" Thomas nodded, surprised by her understanding. "My late husband was a geologist," she explained. "He often said that local knowledge, especially from indigenous peoples, frequently proved more accurate than academic theories." She glanced at the mine entrance. "He would have found your approach fascinating." After Catherine departed, Thomas returned to work with renewed determination. By sunset, he had begun the new tunnel, angling northeast as the tribal map indicated. The rock here was different, harder, but with promising streaks of quartz. The next morning, he continued following the new direction. Hours passed as he chipped methodically at the stone face, his lantern casting long shadows in the narrow tunnel. Suddenly, his pick struck something that caused a different sound, a solid, resonant tone that experienced miners recognize. Thomas held his lantern closer. Within the newly exposed rock face, veins of white quartz threaded through the darker stone. And there, catching the light like frozen fire, a gleaming network of gold. Not the meager, scattered flecks that the previous owners had found, but rich, abundant gold woven through the quartz. Thomas stood motionless, his heart hammering in his chest. After carefully taking several samples, he backed out of the tunnel, unwilling to believe his eyes until he could examine his find in proper daylight. Outside, the afternoon sun confirmed what his lantern had revealed. The samples glittered with unmistakable richness. His ancestors had been right. Thunder Spine held gold exactly where they had indicated, just beyond where others had stopped looking. Thomas's mind raced with implications. This wasn't just a lucky strike. It was potentially the richest gold deposit in the territory. Everything would change now, for him, for his people, for Copper Springs itself. His first instinct was to keep the discovery secret while he secured his legal claim, but he knew rumors would spread quickly once he began extracting ore. Samuel Blackwood's Territorial Mining Company had eyes everywhere, and the ruthless businessman wouldn't hesitate to challenge an Apache's right to such wealth. Thomas carefully wrapped the best sample in his bandana and concealed the others under a rock. He needed to visit the assayer in town to confirm the value, but discretion was essential. As the sun began its westward descent, he covered the new tunnel entrance with brush and mounted his horse. The knowledge of what lay beneath his feet both elated and terrified him. Gold had driven men to murder for far less than what Thunder Spine contained. As he rode toward town, Thomas touched the deed in his pocket, wondering if the paper that had seemed worthless days ago would now be worth dying for. Thomas entered Copper Springs just as the last light was fading, timing his arrival to minimize attention. He headed directly to Holloway's assay office, hoping the elderly assayer might still be working. A thin strip of light beneath the door confirmed his luck. Marcus Holloway was known for his discretion and fair dealings with all miners, regardless of background. When Thomas entered, the white-haired man glanced up from his work table. "Redwater," he nodded. "Bit late for business." Thomas placed his wrapped sample on the counter. "Thought you might take a look at this." Holloway unwrapped the bandana, adjusting his spectacles. His expression remained professionally neutral as he examined the specimen. But Thomas detected a subtle change in his posture. Without a word, the assayer took the sample to his workbench, where he performed several tests with practiced efficiency. Thomas waited silently, watching the older man's methodical movements. Finally, Holloway returned, holding a certificate. "Where exactly did this come from?" he asked quietly. "My claim," Thomas answered simply. "I've been assaying in this territory for 30 years, Holloway said, handing over the certificate. "This is among the richest samples I've ever tested." Thomas glanced at the document, the numbers confirming what he already suspected. The ore contained gold worth roughly $80 per ton, nearly 20 times what typical mines in the area produced. "I'd advise discretion," Holloway added, his voice lowered. "Findings like this attract unwanted attention." Thomas nodded, pocketing the certificate. "I'd appreciate your keeping this between us for now." "My professional ethics demand it," Holloway assured him. "But secrets have a way of escaping in mining country." Thomas stepped outside, careful to scan the darkened street before mounting his horse. He hadn't gone 10 paces when a voice called from the shadows. "Working late, Redwater?" Samuel Blackwood emerged from beside the bank building, his expensive eastern suit incongruous in the dusty frontier town. 2 men flanked him, his mining foreman and a clerk Thomas recognized from the land office. "Mr. Blackwood," Thomas acknowledged, keeping his expression neutral. "Curious timing for an assay," Blackwood observed. "Found something interesting in that worthless hole?" "Just being thorough," Thomas replied. Blackwood stepped closer, his demeanor falsely casual. "I've been thinking about our previous conversation. My offer to purchase your claim still stands. $500. More than generous for a property that's already bankrupted 5 owners. I'm not looking to sell." Blackwood's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Everyone has a price, Redwater. What's yours?" "Good night, Mr. Blackwood," Thomas said, nudging his horse forward. "The territorial government is reassessing reservation boundaries," Blackwood called after him. "Might be that mine sits on public land after all. Something to consider before you invest too much effort." Thomas rode on without responding, the threat hanging in the night air. Blackwood's presence outside the assay office couldn't be coincidence. The man had informants everywhere. The following morning, Catherine found Thomas reinforcing the mine entrance with additional timber. "I heard Blackwood approached you in town last night," she said without preamble. Thomas paused his work. "News travels fast. Small towns have few secrets," she replied. "Did you find something?" After a moment's hesitation, Thomas led her inside the tunnel, holding his lantern to illuminate the new excavation. Catherine's sharp intake of breath echoed in the confined space when she saw the gold-laced quartz. "Thomas," she whispered, "this is extraordinary." "The assayer confirmed it," he said, watching her examine the gleaming veins. "Richest deposit in the territory." Catherine turned to him, her expression troubled. "Blackwood won't let this go easily. He has connections in the territorial government, friends in the courts." "I have the deed," Thomas said. "A piece of paper may not be enough," she warned. "The law treats Indian claims differently, especially when valuable resources are involved." Outside, in the clear morning light, Catherine's concern was evident. "You need legal protection, Thomas. The reservation boundaries are deliberately vague in places. Blackwood could exploit that." "What would you suggest?" "My father was a lawyer before he married my Cherokee mother and moved west," she said. "I have some understanding of mining law. I could help you research your position, find precedents that might protect your claim." Thomas studied her, wondering about her motives. "Why would you do that?" Catherine met his gaze directly. Because I've seen how Blackwood operates. He's already pressuring the territorial government to reduce the reservation's water allotment. Her expression softened slightly. And because I believe you'd use this discovery to help your people, not just yourself. Thomas nodded slowly. I'll need to hire men I trust to help extract the ore and guard the site. My cousins from the reservation. A distant rider approaching at speed interrupted him. It was Joseph Redhawk, one of the young men from the reservation. Thomas, he called, dismounting quickly. Word's spreading about your find. 3 men were asking questions at the trading post this morning. Strangers, not from around here. Thomas exchanged a glance with Catherine. The race for Thunder's Spine had begun. The Territorial Law Library occupied a dusty corner of the courthouse in Tucson, a day's ride from Copper Springs. Thomas and Catherine sat at a worn oak table, surrounded by leather-bound volumes of mining regulations, land statutes, and court decisions. Here, Catherine said, turning a heavy book toward Thomas. The Mining Act of 1872 states that all valuable mineral deposits on lands belonging to the United States are free and open to exploration and purchase by citizens. Thomas studied the dense legal text. Does that include Apache citizens? Catherine's expression tightened. That's where it gets complicated. She pulled another volume from the stack. Indian reservations fall under federal trust, with resource rights often separate from occupancy rights. For hours they pored over the convoluted legal framework that governed mining claims, focusing particularly on cases involving indigenous lands. The picture that emerged was troubling. The boundaries of your reservation were established by executive order, not treaty, Catherine explained. That makes them more vulnerable to reinterpretation. Thomas rubbed his eyes. And Blackwood's already hinting the mine might not be on reservation land. Exactly. If he can convince territorial officials to resurvey the boundaries, he might claim the mine falls on public land, making it subject to different rules. They gathered the most relevant documents, with Catherine making careful notes on precedents that might support Thomas's claim. As they were preparing to leave, the clerk approached. Found what you were looking for? The man's seemingly casual question carried an undercurrent of suspicion. Just researching property boundaries, Catherine replied pleasantly. The clerk's eyes lingered on Thomas. Interesting topic for an Apache. Outside, Thomas helped Catherine onto her horse. That clerk will report our research to Blackwood before sundown. Then we'd better be prepared, she said. The law may be ambiguous, but possession matters. You need to maintain continuous operation of the mine and document everything. When they returned to Copper Springs the following day, Thomas found his cousins, Joseph and Michael Redhawk, already standing guard at the mine entrance. 3 more Apache men were constructing a small cabin nearby. Word reached the reservation, Joseph explained. These men volunteered to help. Thomas was moved by their support but concerned about the rapid spread of information. How many people know about the gold? Too many, Michael answered grimly. 2 prospectors were snooping around yesterday. We sent them away, but they'll be back. That evening, as Thomas reviewed Catherine's legal notes by lamplight, Sheriff McIntyre arrived at the growing encampment. Getting quite an operation going here, Redwater, he observed, dismounting. Heard you struck a decent vein. News travels fast, Thomas replied cautiously. Faster than you'd like, I'd wager. The sheriff surveyed the site. Had 3 separate reports of claim jumpers heading this way. Thought you should know. Thomas appreciated the warning. Thank you, Sheriff. McIntyre's weathered face remained impassive. Don't thank me yet. Blackwood visited the territorial office in Tucson last week. Been speaking with Indian Agent Fletcher too. About the reservation boundaries? Among other things. The sheriff adjusted his hat. Fletcher's never been a friend to your people, Redwater, and he owes Blackwood for covering some gambling debts. After McIntyre departed, Thomas called a meeting with his small crew. We'll work in shifts, 2 men mining, the rest on guard. No one enters the tunnel without my permission. As the men dispersed to their duties, Catherine approached with a troubled expression. William Fletcher was at the school today, asking unusual questions about the reservation's western boundary. The Indian agent has no love for Apache prosperity, Thomas said bitterly. He mentioned that the terms of the executive order establishing the reservation specified lands unsuitable for mining development should be excluded, Catherine added. He's clearly building Blackwood's case. Thomas gazed toward the darkening mountains. Then we need to extract and hide as much gold as possible before they make their move. Be careful, Thomas, Catherine warned. The law punishes claim jumping, but it rarely protects Indian rights with the same vigor. Over the next week, Thomas and his crew worked tirelessly, following the rich vein deeper along Thunder's spine. Each day yielded more gold-laden ore, which they processed discreetly, hiding the most valuable pieces in a secret cache rather than taking them to town. Thomas sent Michael to Phoenix with a small sample to be sold quietly, using the proceeds to purchase additional supplies and hire 2 more trusted men from the reservation. Meanwhile, Catherine continued researching legal protections, discovering that Thomas's claim might be strengthened if he could prove the mine's development benefited the entire reservation community rather than just himself. We need a plan for the proceeds, she told him one evening as they shared coffee outside his newly constructed cabin. Something that demonstrates your intention to improve reservation conditions. Thomas nodded. I've been thinking about a water system. The eastern slopes have natural springs that could be channeled to the reservation if we had the means to build proper pipelines. Catherine's eyes lit up. That's exactly the kind of project that might help your legal case. I'll draw up a proposal. As she rose to leave, Thomas caught her hand impulsively. Why are you helping me, Catherine? Really? She hesitated, then met his gaze directly. Because I've spent 3 years watching good people suffer from laws designed to keep them dependent. Because I believe your success could change more than just your own circumstances. Thomas held her gaze a moment longer before releasing her hand. Neither spoke of the growing connection between them, but both felt its undeniable presence in the silence that followed. Smoke from the council fire rose straight into the evening sky as Thomas sat among the tribal elders. Chief Mongas passed the ceremonial pipe, its carved soapstone bowl bearing symbols that had guided the Apache for generations. When it reached Thomas, he drew deeply, honoring the tradition before speaking. The gold is real, he confirmed, his voice carrying across the circle. Richer than any deposit found in the territory. Elder White Hawk leaned forward. And you found this using the ancient map? Thomas nodded. Thunder's spine led me exactly where our ancestors indicated. A murmur of approval spread through the council, but Elder Nighthorse raised a cautionary hand. Gold has never brought our people blessing. The white man's hunger for yellow metal drove them to take our lands to begin with. This is different, Thomas argued. This time, the gold is on our land, under our control. For how long? Nighthorse challenged. Already we hear that Blackwood speaks with Fletcher about changing the boundaries. Chief Mongas held up the tribal map, now worn thin at the creases from Thomas's frequent consulting. Our ancestors marked these boundaries with their blood. Papers in Washington cannot change what the earth itself remembers. The discussion continued as night deepened, dividing the council. Some elders saw the gold as a curse that would bring only conflict, while others recognized the opportunity it presented for a people long denied resources. What would you do with this wealth, Thomas Redwater? Asked White Hawk. Thomas outlined his vision. Clean water systems drawing from the eastern springs, a proper clinic for the reservation, expanded schools teaching both traditional knowledge and modern skills, better tools and seeds for farming the difficult land. And who would control these decisions? Another elder questioned. You alone. I propose a council, Thomas answered. 5 elders and 5 younger members, deciding together how the proceeds should be used for our community's benefit. As the meeting concluded, near midnight, the council remained divided, but gave Thomas conditional approval to continue, provided he established the proposed governing council and maintained regular reports on the mine's development. The next morning, Catherine arrived at the mine to find Thomas instructing a young Apache man on proper timber bracing techniques. How did the council meeting go? She asked when they had a moment alone. Mixed, Thomas admitted. Some see opportunity, others see danger. Both perspectives have merit, Catherine observed. She unfolded a document she'd brought. I've drafted a legal trust structure that might help protect the mine's proceeds for community use. Could strengthen your position if challenges arise. Thomas studied the document. You're suggesting we establish a formal trust for the benefit of the reservation? With legally binding provisions ensuring the proceeds go toward specific community improvements, she confirmed. Courts have occasionally recognized such arrangements, even when they've been reluctant about Indian property rights otherwise. Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of a smartly dressed man in a government wagon. William Fletcher, the Indian agent assigned to oversee the reservation, stepped down with the practiced condescension of a bureaucrat accustomed to wielding authority over those he considered inferior. Redwater, he acknowledged coldly before turning a more cordial expression to Catherine. Miss Wilcox, surprised to find you here instead of teaching your pupils. School day ended an hour ago, Mr. Fletcher, she replied evenly. Fletcher surveyed the growing operation with obvious disapproval. I've received concerning reports about unauthorized mining activity on federal land. This claim is properly filed and lies within reservation boundaries, Thomas stated. Fletcher's thin smile didn't reach his eyes. The Department of Interior is reviewing those boundaries as we speak. There appears to have been an unfortunate error in the original surveys. How convenient, Catherine remarked. Ignoring her comment, Fletcher produced an official-looking document. In the meantime, I'm here to inform you that any minerals extracted are subject to federal oversight. All proceeds must be reported to my office immediately. Thomas accepted the paper without comment, recognizing the familiar pattern. When indigenous people found something of value, rules suddenly changed to benefit others. After Fletcher departed, Catherine examined the document. This is a clear overreach of his authority. The 1872 mining law doesn't give Indian agents control over proceeds. But challenging him requires access to courts that rarely side with Apache plaintiffs, Thomas noted grimly. That evening, as they reviewed their options by lamplight, a warning shout came from the perimeter. Thomas grabbed his rifle and rushed outside to find Joseph Redhawk confronting 3 armed men at the edge of the camp. Said they're prospectors looking to stake nearby claims, Joseph reported, his rifle trained on the intruders. Thomas recognized one of the men as a known associate of Blackwood's mining operation. These weren't independent prospectors, they were scouts assessing the mine's defenses. This claim is properly registered, Thomas told them firmly. There's nothing available for staking within a mile of here. Free country, ain't it? The leader replied with a smirk. Man can look around if he wants. Not on private property after dark, Thomas countered. Sheriff McIntyre would take a dim view of armed men prowling around legitimate mining operations. After a tense standoff, the men withdrew, but Thomas had no illusions about their departure. The confrontation was merely a preliminary move in Blackwood's strategy, testing responses, gathering information before the real assault began. As he returned to the cabin, Catherine's worried expression confirmed she understood the implications too. They're getting bolder, she said softly. Thomas unrolled the large blueprint across the rough-hewn table in his cabin. The detailed drawing showed a system of pipes connecting the eastern mountain springs to the parched reservation lands, with storage tanks and distribution points carefully mapped. Mr. Dawson says it's entirely feasible, Thomas explained to Catherine and the small group of Apache elders gathered around. The elevation provides natural pressure, and with proper materials, the system could deliver clean water to the entire reservation. Charles Dawson, a civil engineer from Phoenix whom Thomas had hired with the first proceeds from the mine, nodded in agreement. I've designed similar systems throughout the territory. The initial cost is substantial, but maintenance is minimal once installed. Elder Whitehawk traced the blue lines on the blueprint with a weathered finger. Water has always been life for our people. With this, we could grow crops year-round, even in the dry season. How soon could construction begin? Asked Chief Mongas. With materials ordered promptly, within a month, Dawson replied. I estimate 4 months to complete the entire system. After the meeting, as Dawson departed with his commission, Catherine lingered behind. The water system is a powerful statement, Thomas. It demonstrates exactly what we've argued, that the mine's proceeds are benefiting the entire community. Thomas nodded. Let's hope it strengthens our position against Blackwood and Fletcher. Speaking of legal positions, Catherine said, I've been corresponding with a lawyer in Santa Fe, James Harrington. He specializes in cases involving tribal lands and has actually won several significant decisions. Can we afford him? He's willing to meet with us next week in Tucson, she replied. He's already handling another case there and can make time for a consultation. Thomas studied her face, noting the lines of fatigue around her eyes. She had been dividing her time between teaching and helping with the mine's legal challenges, often working late into the night researching precedents and drafting documents. You're doing too much, he said softly. Catherine smiled. So are you. But this is important, Thomas. What you've started here could change things beyond just the reservation. If an Apache man can successfully develop a major mining operation despite all the obstacles, that's precisely what Blackwood fears, Thomas observed. It's not just about this gold. It's about what it represents. The following day, as Thomas supervised the loading of another shipment of ore for processing, Sheriff McIntyre arrived with troubling news. Territorial Office received formal challenges to your claim yesterday, he announced without preamble. Blackwood's company filed one, and there's another from the Department of Interior itself. On what grounds? Thomas asked, though he already knew the answer. Boundary disputes, mainly. They're claiming your mine falls just outside the reservation line according to new surveys. The sheriff shook his head. There's also some nonsense about the original executive order excluding mineral-rich lands from the reservation grant. Thomas had expected this, but hearing it confirmed still felt like a physical blow. When will it be heard? Judge Parker's circuit takes him to Tucson in 3 weeks. Both challenges are on his docket. McIntyre hesitated. Thomas, Parker's fair as judges go, but he's ruled against Indian claims before when the law gave him any wiggle room. After the sheriff departed, Thomas gathered his crew, explaining the situation in blunt terms. We need to extract as much as possible before the hearing. Double shifts, but maintain safety. That evening, as Thomas reviewed the production figures in his cabin, a commotion outside drew his attention. He emerged to find Fletcher marching toward him, flanked by 2 armed men. By authority of the Department of Interior, I'm issuing an immediate cease and desist order, Fletcher announced, thrusting a document at Thomas. All mining operations must stop pending resolution of the boundary dispute. Thomas scanned the paper. This isn't a court order. I don't need one, Fletcher retorted. As Indian agent, I have authority over activities on reservation land. Then you're acknowledging this is reservation land? Catherine's voice came from behind Thomas as she approached from the direction of the mine entrance. Fletcher's face tightened. Don't play word games, Miss Wilcox. This operation stops now, or I'll return with federal marshals. After Fletcher left, Catherine examined the document carefully. This exceeds his authority. He's trying to stop production before the hearing to weaken your position. Can he enforce it? He can make trouble, she admitted. But I don't believe marshals would act without a proper court order. Thomas gazed toward the mine entrance, where his men continued working despite Fletcher's threats. We keep going, he decided. But we need to move the processed gold somewhere safe off-site. What about the school? Catherine suggested. There's a storage cellar that's rarely used. Fletcher would never think to look there. Thomas considered her suggestion. It made practical sense, but it also drew her deeper into potential legal jeopardy. Catherine, if they catch you hiding gold from my mine, they won't, she interrupted. And besides, I'm already fully committed to this cause. Her hand briefly touched his arm. To our cause. The simple gesture and the quiet determination in her voice affected Thomas more deeply than he wanted to admit. In the gathering dusk, with threats mounting from all sides, her unwavering support was the one certainty he could depend on. The The Tucson courthouse stood as a monument to territorial aspirations of grandeur, its red brick facade and white columns incongruous against the dusty landscape. Inside, the courtroom buzzed with unusual activity for a property dispute. Blackwood had ensured a substantial audience, filling the gallery with his supporters. Thomas sat beside James Harrington, the silver-haired lawyer Catherine had recommended. Despite his advanced years, Harrington projected fierce intensity as he organized documents for presentation. "Judge Parker has a reputation for strict adherence to written law," he whispered to Thomas. "We'll focus on the original reservation boundaries and your continuous occupation of the claim." Catherine sat directly behind them, her presence a silent reminder of all that was at stake. Beyond the personal fortune represented by the mine, the case would determine whether Apache people could control valuable resources on their own land, a precedent with far-reaching implications. When Judge Parker entered, his stern countenance silenced the room immediately. After preliminary motions, Blackwood's attorney presented their case first, arguing that recent surveys clearly showed the mine fell outside reservation boundaries. Furthermore, the attorney continued, the executive order establishing the Apache reservation explicitly excluded lands with significant mineral potential, reflecting Congress's intent to reserve such resources for public development. Indian Agent Fletcher testified next, presenting maps with suspiciously convenient boundary adjustments. These new surveys, conducted with modern equipment, correct errors in the original boundary determinations, he claimed. By midday, when the court recessed for lunch, Thomas's spirits had sunk. The legal arguments against him seemed formidable, constructed with precision by men who understood how to manipulate the system. "They're making a compelling case," he admitted to Harrington as they conferred in a side chamber. "Yes, but we haven't presented our evidence yet," the lawyer reminded him. "The judge needs to see the original documents, not just Fletcher's convenient reinterpretations." As they prepared to return to the courtroom, the door opened to admit a clerk. "Mr. Harrington? This just arrived by special courier for your case." The clerk handed over a sealed packet addressed to the lawyer. Harrington opened it, his expression shifting from curiosity to shock as he examined the contents. "What is it?" Thomas asked. "Land grant documents," Harrington replied, his voice uncharacteristically subdued. "Spanish land grants from 1789. Predating both American acquisition and the reservation's establishment." He looked up at Thomas. "These show the mine site was privately owned before the United States took control of the territory. How does that affect our case?" Harrington hesitated. "It complicates things significantly. If these documents are authenticated, they could invalidate both your claim and Blackwood's challenge." "Who sent them?" Catherine asked, examining the courier's packaging. "There's a letter here from a law office in Santa Fe," Harrington said, unfolding a separate sheet. "They represent the heirs of Don Miguel Veracruz, who received the original grant from the Spanish crown." Catherine went pale.
Veracruz.
Harrington nodded, scanning the letter. "The firm has been attempting to trace the current ownership of several old Spanish grants. According to this, the rightful heir would be—" He looked up, his eyes fixing on Catherine, "the widow of Jonathan Wilcox, who was apparently a direct descendant of Don Miguel's daughter." Thomas turned to Catherine, confusion giving way to disbelief. "You?" The courtroom fell silent when court resumed, the tension palpable as Harrington approached the bench. "Your Honor, I must present new evidence that fundamentally alters this case." Judge Parker frowned. "Proceed, counselor. But be aware I look unfavorably on last-minute surprises." Harrington submitted the Spanish land grant documents, explaining their provenance and implications. As the judge examined them, Blackwood conferred urgently with his attorney, clearly blindsided by this development. "If these documents are authentic," Judge Parker noted, "they raise serious questions about the underlying ownership of the disputed property." He looked up. "You claim Mrs. Wilcox is the rightful heir to this grant?" "The documentation appears to support that conclusion, Your Honor," Harrington confirmed. Judge Parker turned his attention to Catherine. "Mrs. Wilcox, were you aware of this potential claim?" All eyes in the courtroom focused on Catherine as she stood. "No, Your Honor. My late husband mentioned family connections to early Spanish settlers, but I had no knowledge of any land grants." Thomas watched her carefully, searching for signs that she had concealed this information. Her shock appeared genuine, but doubt crept into his mind. Had she known all along? Was her interest in his mine motivated by her own potential claim? "Given this significant new information," Judge Parker announced, "I am ordering a 2-week recess for authentication of these documents and proper notification of all potential claimants." He fixed a stern gaze on the attorneys. "When we reconvene, I expect full disclosure of all relevant facts." Outside the courthouse, Thomas confronted Catherine. "Did you know about this?" "No, Thomas, I swear," she insisted, distress evident in her eyes. "Jonathan rarely spoke about his family history. I knew his grandmother was Spanish, but nothing about land grants." Thomas wanted to believe her, but the timing seemed too convenient, the coincidence too perfect. "Your husband was a geologist. He never mentioned potential mining sites on family land." Catherine's expression hardened slightly. "He died before we ever came to this territory, Thomas. I came west after his death, seeking a fresh start." As they stood in uncertain silence, Blackwood approached, his usual confidence undiminished. "Interesting development, Mrs. Wilcox. Perhaps we should discuss a partnership arrangement, given your newly discovered interests." The calculating look in his eyes made his intentions clear. If he couldn't defeat Thomas's claim directly, he would attempt to gain control through Catherine instead. The ride back to Copper Springs passed in uncomfortable silence. Thomas and Catherine had barely spoken since leaving the courthouse, each lost in private thoughts about the day's revelations. As they approached the town, Catherine finally broke the silence. "We need to talk, Thomas. Not here on the road." They stopped at her small house behind the schoolhouse, a modest structure that reflected her practical nature. Inside, Catherine lit a lamp and removed her traveling gloves, revealing the simple gold wedding band she still wore 5 years after her husband's death. "I never lied to you, Thomas," she began, turning the ring on her finger. "I had no knowledge of any Spanish land grants or potential claims to the mine." Thomas wanted to believe her. In the lamp's warm glow, her face showed the sincerity he'd come to trust over these past months. Yet doubt lingered. "It's a remarkable coincidence." "Yes, it is," she acknowledged. "When Jonathan died in Chicago, I was grief-stricken and directionless. I took the teaching position here because it was as far from my old life as I could get." She met his gaze directly. "I never examined his family papers closely. Most remained in storage with his parents in St. Louis. The law firm found you easily enough." "They've probably been searching for years," Catherine replied. "These old Spanish claims have become valuable as the territory develops." Thomas paced the small room, conflicted. "If the documents are authenticated, you'll own the mine legally." "I don't want the mine, Thomas." She stepped closer. "Everything we've worked for, the water system, the community trust, that's what matters. Not who holds the legal title." "Blackwood won't see it that way. He'll pressure you to sell or partner with him." Catherine's expression hardened. "I've dealt with men like Blackwood my entire life. He doesn't intimidate me." Thomas noticed a packet of letters on her desk, tied with faded ribbon. Following his gaze, Catherine retrieved them. "These are from Jonathan," she explained, untying the bundle. "Most are from our courtship, but some discuss his family history." She selected one and handed it to Thomas. "I reviewed them after today's hearing. This one mentions his grandmother's Spanish heritage, but nothing about land grants." As Thomas scanned the letter, written in a precise, educated hand, Catherine continued. "I should have told you about Jonathan's connection to the territory. He had always planned to come west, to study the geological formations here." Her voice softened. "After he died, completing that journey became my way of honoring him." Thomas returned the letter, noticing how carefully she refolded it. Her continued devotion to her husband's memory was evident in that simple gesture. It triggered an unexpected pang of jealousy that he immediately tried to suppress. "What will you do if the claim is confirmed as yours?" he asked. "We'll face that when it happens," she answered. "For now, we should continue as planned, extracting or securing the site and preparing our case for when court reconvenes." Thomas nodded, but a new distance had formed between them. The partnership that had felt so natural now carried complications neither had anticipated. The next morning, Fletcher summoned Catherine to his office. Thomas accompanied her despite her protests that she could handle the Indian agent alone. "Mrs. Wilcox," Fletcher began with false cordiality, "in light of recent developments, I'm reassessing your position at the reservation school." "On what grounds?" Catherine demanded. "Conflict of interest," he replied smoothly. "As a potential claimant to valuable mining property, your continued role teaching Apache children seems inappropriate." "That's absurd," Thomas interjected. "Mrs. Wilcox's teaching has nothing to do with the mine." Fletcher's thin smile didn't reach his eyes. "Nevertheless, I'm temporarily suspending her from her duties pending resolution of these property matters." Catherine remained composed. "You lack the authority to remove me. The Territorial Education Board appointed me, not the Indian Agency." "Perhaps," Fletcher conceded, "but I control access to the reservation, and without my approval, you won't be permitted to enter." The thinly veiled threat hung in the air as they departed Fletcher's office. Outside, Catherine's composure finally cracked. "They're trying to isolate us from each other," she said, anger breaking through her usually measured tone. "Divide our resources, weaken our position before court reconvenes." "It's working," Thomas admitted. "The mine crew is nervous after yesterday's revelations. Some are questioning whether to continue working." As they walked through town, Benjamin Cole approached them hesitantly. Thomas hadn't seen the man since he'd signed over the mine deed months earlier. "Redwater," Cole nodded nervously. "Heard about the court proceedings. Thought you should know. Blackwood's been asking about the original sale documents between us." "What did you tell him?" Thomas asked. "Nothing yet," Cole replied. "But he's offering good money for information that might invalidate your claim." He glanced around anxiously. "Thing is, I found some old survey maps in my father's papers. They show different boundary markers than the current reservation maps." Thomas exchanged a glance with Catherine. "What kind of differences?" "The original survey from 1863 shows Thunder's Spine clearly within reservation boundaries," Cole explained. "Later surveys shifted the line just enough to place potential mining sites on public land." "Deliberate manipulation," Catherine murmured. "Would you testify to this?" Thomas asked. Cole hesitated. "Blackwood has friends everywhere. But," he straightened slightly, "I owe you for being fair when I couldn't pay my debts. Most men would have taken everything." As Cole departed, promising to bring the old survey maps, Catherine turned to Thomas. "This could help our case, regardless of the Spanish grant issue." Thomas nodded, but his expression remained troubled. "The question is whether Judge Parker will give more weight to the original boundaries or to the Spanish grant. Or to Blackwood's influence," Catherine added grimly. "The next 2 weeks will determine everything." The official summons arrived by courier 1 week before the court was scheduled to reconvene. Thomas unfolded the stiff parchment with its territorial seal and formal language requiring his presence in Tucson. "It's as we expected," he told Harrington, who had traveled to Copper Springs to prepare their case. "Both Blackwood's challenge and the Spanish grant will be addressed together." The lawyer nodded gravely. "Judge Parker is known for efficiency. He'll want to resolve all claims in a single ruling." They gathered in Thomas's cabin, which had become their unofficial headquarters. Maps and legal documents covered every surface as they refined their strategy. Catherine entered, carrying more papers. "I've been reviewing the Spanish grant documentation," she said. "There's something odd about the language defining the northern boundary." Harrington adjusted his spectacles to examine the passage she indicated. "Indeed, the original Spanish uses landmarks that don't match modern maps." "Because they used different names," Thomas suggested. The Apache called these mountains by other names before the Spanish arrived, and the Spanish used their own terms before the Americans came. Exactly, Catherine agreed. I cross-referenced with early missionary accounts. What the Spanish called Sierra de Plata corresponds to Thunder's Spine in Apache tradition. Harrington's eyes lit with understanding. If we can prove that connection, it strengthens both your claims against Blackwood. The Spanish grant and the Apache boundaries would align, placing the mine squarely within both. Thomas and Catherine exchanged glances, their shared purpose temporarily overshadowing the tension that had grown between them since the revelation of her potential claim. While Harrington continued legal preparations, Thomas focused on securing the mine's production. Each day, trusted Apache workers extracted ore from the increasingly rich vein, processing enough to fund their legal battle while concealing the true extent of the mine's value. We need to move another shipment, Thomas told Joseph Redhawk as they inspected the latest excavation, but not through regular channels. Blackwood has men watching the usual routes. Joseph nodded. My cousin works for the freight company in Phoenix. He can help arrange discreet transport. Good. We need funds for Harrington's fee and to keep the mine operating, Thomas replied. If Blackwood succeeds in shutting us down before the hearing, we lose our strongest position. That evening, as Thomas was reviewing production figures by lamplight, Catherine arrived with unexpected news. Fletcher's been reassigned, she announced. Temporarily relieved of duties pending an investigation into financial irregularities. Thomas looked up sharply. What kind of irregularities? Apparently, several $1,000s meant for reservation supplies cannot be accounted for, she explained, a hint of satisfaction in her voice. The territorial governor ordered an audit after receiving anonymous documentation. Thomas raised an eyebrow. Anonymous. Catherine's smile was subtle. Benjamin Cole had more to share than just boundary maps. He kept meticulous records of payments made to Fletcher in exchange for looking the other way on various matters. Fletcher's removal helps us, Thomas acknowledged, but Blackwood remains the real threat. Yes, and he's growing desperate, Catherine said, her expression turning serious. There was an incident at the school today. Someone broke in and ransacked my quarters. Thomas stood immediately. Were you there? Are you hurt? I was teaching, she assured him. Nothing valuable was taken, but my papers were thoroughly searched. They're looking for the Spanish grant documents, Thomas realized, or anything that might weaken your claim. Harrington has the originals secure in Tucson, Catherine said, but this shows how far Blackwood will go. Thomas paced the small cabin. You shouldn't stay at the school alone. It's too isolated. I can manage. Catherine, he interrupted, his voice firm but gentle. This isn't about your capabilities. Blackwood is desperate and dangerous. After a moment's hesitation, she nodded. I'll stay with Sarah Whitefeather's family on the reservation. Fletcher can't interfere now, and they've offered before. The following day, Thomas met with the tribal council to update them on the legal proceedings. Elder Nighthorse remained skeptical. White men's courts rarely favor Indian rights, he observed. Why would this judge be different? Because we have evidence of deliberate boundary manipulation, Thomas explained. And with the Spanish grant potentially supporting our position rather than conflicting with it, Judge Parker will have legal grounds to rule in our favor. Chief Mongas studied Thomas thoughtfully. And if this ruling goes against us, what then? Thomas had asked himself the same question countless times. Then we appeal to higher courts. And in the meantime, we continue operating the mine as best we can. The schoolteacher, White Hawk interjected. If her claim is confirmed, where do her loyalties lie? With justice, Thomas answered, more confidently than he felt. Despite their continued cooperation, the unresolved question of Catherine's ultimate intentions created an undercurrent of uncertainty. As the meeting concluded, Chief Mongas presented Thomas with a small leather pouch. Your father carried this medicine bundle. It contains sacred herbs and stones from our ancestral lands, blessed by 4 generations of medicine men. Thomas accepted the gift with profound gratitude, recognizing its significance. "I will carry it with honor. When you face these men in their court," the chief continued, "you will not stand alone. The spirits of our ancestors stand with you, as does the strength of our people." The simple ceremony strengthened Thomas's resolve. As the court date approached, he knew the coming battle would determine not just his future, but potentially the economic independence of the entire Apache community. The night before their departure for Tucson, Thomas sought solitude on a ridge overlooking the mine. His father's medicine bundle hung at his neck, its familiar weight a connection to generations past. In the silver moonlight, he performed the purification ritual as he had been taught, burning sacred sage and cedar while offering prayers for guidance. His meditation was interrupted by approaching footsteps. Thomas turned to find Catherine climbing the path toward him. "I'm sorry," she said, noticing the remnants of his ceremony. "I didn't mean to intrude." "You're not intruding," he assured her, making space on the flat stone where he sat. Catherine settled beside him, gazing at the expansive view. "It's beautiful up here. My grandfather brought me to this spot when I was a boy," Thomas said. "He taught me to see the land as a living entity, not just territory to be claimed or exploited." "I wish more people understood that perspective," Catherine replied softly. They sat in companionable silence, the tension of recent weeks momentarily suspended. Finally, Catherine spoke again. "I received a letter from Blackwood today," she revealed. "He's offering $20,000 for my potential claim, regardless of the court's decision." Thomas felt a cold weight settle in his stomach. "That's a substantial offer." "Yes," she agreed, meeting his gaze directly. "I wrote back declining it." Relief washed through him, though he tried not to show it too plainly. "He'll increase the offer." "Undoubtedly," she said with a slight smile. "But there are some things money can't buy, Thomas." The sincerity in her voice touched him deeply. In that moment, the last of his doubts about her motives faded. Whatever happened in court, Catherine Wilcox was not motivated by personal gain. "We should get some rest," he suggested eventually. "Tomorrow will be demanding." As they descended the path in the moonlight, Thomas found himself sharing Apache stories about the constellations overhead, teachings normally reserved for tribal members. Catherine listened with genuine interest, occasionally asking insightful questions that revealed her respect for his traditions. Near the bottom of the trail, Thomas suddenly halted, his hand raised for silence. In the shadows ahead, something had moved, something that didn't belong. "Get down," he whispered, pulling Catherine behind a large boulder. Seconds later, a rifle shot cracked through the night, the bullet striking precisely where they had been standing. Thomas drew his own weapon as two more shots splintered rock nearby. "Stay here," he instructed, then darted between protective outcroppings, making his way toward the attacker's position. A shadowy figure rose to fire again, but Thomas was faster. His shot found its mark, eliciting a cry of pain. Moments later, hoofbeats pounded away into the darkness as the would-be assassins fled. "Are you hit?" Catherine asked anxiously when he returned to her. "No," Thomas assured her. "But this confirms what we suspected. Blackwood isn't willing to risk losing in court." Back at the camp, the attempted ambush created new urgency. Thomas doubled the guards and moved Catherine to the most secure cabin. As Harrington gathered their legal documents, Thomas conferred with Joseph Redhawk. "I want the gold shipment moved tonight," he instructed. "Use the Eastern Trail, not the main road." Joseph nodded. "And if there's trouble, abandon the shipment if necessary. No gold is worth dying for." Thomas clasped his friend's shoulder. "But get those survey maps from Cole to Tucson safely. They're our most crucial evidence." The following morning, as they prepared to depart, Fletcher unexpectedly appeared. Despite his temporary removal, the Indian agent carried himself with undiminished authority. "Redwater," he called, dismounting. "A word before you leave." Thomas approached cautiously, aware of Joseph and Michael keeping the man in their rifle sights from discreet positions. "I've been authorized to make you an offer," Fletcher stated without preamble. Relinquish your claim to the mine, and you'll receive a generous payment plus exclusive water rights for the reservation's eastern section. Whose authorization? Thomas asked. Yours? Or Blackwood's? Fletcher's expression tightened. This comes directly from territorial officials. They're concerned about potential unrest if an Apache successfully develops a major gold mine. You mean they're concerned about the precedent? Thomas corrected. About other tribes asserting rights to valuable resources on their lands. Consider carefully, Fletcher warned. The offer includes guaranteed protection for your people. Refuse, and who knows what changes might affect reservation boundaries in the future. The thinly veiled threat confirmed what Thomas had long suspected. This case had implications far beyond one mine. It represented a direct challenge to the systematic exclusion of indigenous people from control over valuable resources. I've considered for my entire life, Thomas replied evenly. My answer is no. Fletcher's face hardened. You're making a grave mistake, Redwater. Some battles can't be won, especially by your kind. As the Indian agent rode away, Catherine approached. What did he want? To bribe me with false promises, Thomas explained. They're getting desperate. Good, she said firmly. Desperation leads to mistakes. Thomas loaded the last of their documents into the wagon. We leave in an hour. Harrington will meet us halfway to Tucson. As Catherine returned to make her final preparations, Thomas touched his father's medicine bundle, drawing strength from its connection to his ancestors. Tomorrow they would face Blackwood, Fletcher, and the territorial power structure in Judge Parker's courtroom, a venue where Apache people had rarely found justice. But this time would be different. This time they had evidence of manipulation, documentation of fraud, and the unexpected alignment of Spanish and Apache land claims. Most importantly, they had truth on their side. A powerful weapon when wielded with precision in a court of law. Judge Parker's gavel struck with ceremonial precision, bringing the crowded courtroom to order. The territorial courthouse in Tucson had rarely seen such attendance for a mining claim dispute. Journalists from as far as Phoenix and Santa Fe occupied the back row, drawn by rumors of exceptional gold deposits and the unusual spectacle of an Apache man challenging one of the territory's most powerful businessmen. Thomas sat at the plaintiff's table beside Harrington, acutely aware of the stares directed his way. Few Apache people ever appeared in these courts except as defendants in criminal cases. Catherine sat directly behind them, her quiet presence a source of strength. The court will now hear consolidated arguments regarding claim disputes for the mine property known as Redemption, located in Copper Springs District, Judge Parker announced. I understand there are 3 distinct claims before this court. Blackwood's attorney rose first. Your Honor, Samuel Blackwood and the Territorial Mining Company assert that the mine in question lies on public land open to mineral claims under the 1872 Mining Act. Mr. Blackwood filed the first legitimate claim to this property. Fletcher's government attorney followed. The Department of Interior contends that regardless of exact boundary determinations, the executive order establishing the Apache Reservation explicitly excluded mineral-rich lands from the grant, reserving them for public development. Finally, Harrington stood. Your Honor, we represent 2 claimants with complementary interests. First, Thomas Redwater, who has continuously occupied and developed the mine under color of title, having purchased the claim from its previous owner. Second, Mrs. Catherine Wilcox, whose late husband's family holds rights through Spanish land grant predating both American acquisition and reservation establishment. Judge Parker's eyebrows rose slightly at this unusual alliance. Let me understand this clearly. Mrs. Wilcox could claim ownership through prior Spanish grant, yet she supports Mr. Redwater's claim. We have reached an equitable arrangement, Your Honor, Harrington explained. Should the court recognize the validity of either claim, operations would continue under a joint trust benefiting both Mrs. Wilcox and the Apache community. Murmurs swept the courtroom at this unexpected development. Samuel Blackwood leaned forward in his seat, his expression darkening. Very well, Judge Parker said. Mr. Harrington, as your clients face 2 challenges, please present your case first. Harrington methodically laid out their position, presenting the original deed, documentation of Thomas's continuous operation, and records of improvements made to the property. He then introduced the Spanish land grant documents, explaining how Catherine's claim through her late husband's lineage actually reinforced rather than contradicted Thomas's position. The Spanish grant's northern boundary, described as Sierra de Plata, corresponds precisely with what Apache tradition calls Thunder's Spine, Harrington explained, displaying maps with overlaid boundaries. Both descriptions identify the same geological formation, placing the mine squarely within both the grant and the original reservation boundaries. Throughout the morning, Thomas maintained his composure as Harrington skillfully countered the opposition's arguments. When court recessed for lunch, even Fletcher's attorney appeared concerned by the strength of their presentation. "You're doing well," Catherine whispered as they conferred in a side chamber. "The judge seems to be listening carefully." "Parker has a reputation for following the letter of the law," Harrington cautioned. "The afternoon will be challenging when Blackwood's experts testify about the boundary surveys." He was correct. When court resumed, Blackwood presented a parade of surveyors and government officials who testified that recent measurements clearly showed the mine falling outside reservation boundaries. Their technical explanations were designed to overwhelm the judge with scientific authority. "The original survey contained numerous errors," testified Blackwood's chief engineer, pointing to detailed maps. "Modern equipment reveals that the actual boundary lies half a mile east of Mr. Redwater's claim." Thomas leaned toward Harrington. "Those measurements deliberately ignore the landmarks specified in the executive order," he whispered. "They're using different reference points." Harrington nodded slightly, making notes for cross-examination. Fletcher took the stand next, his testimony particularly damaging. "As Indian agent, I can confirm that the Apache people themselves recognized that this area lay outside their territory until valuable minerals were discovered," he claimed. Mr. Redwater's sudden interest in an abandoned mine arose only after hearing rumors of Territorial Mining Company's geological surveys. The deliberate falsehood made Thomas clench his jaw, but Harrington touched his arm in warning. Showing anger would only reinforce prejudices about volatile Apache temperament. By late afternoon, Blackwood himself testified, projecting the confident authority of a man accustomed to deference. "Your Honor, my company has invested thousands in modern geological surveys throughout the territory. We identified this area as promising but were prevented from filing claims by Mr. Redwater's sudden occupation based on a questionable deed and dubious boundary interpretations." When Blackwood finished, Judge Parker checked the time. "We'll continue tomorrow with cross-examination and rebuttal witnesses. Court is adjourned until 9 o'clock. Outside the courthouse, Thomas, Catherine, and Harrington assessed the day's proceedings. "They presented a coordinated case," Harrington observed. "Fletcher's testimony particularly concerns me. He speaks with the authority of the federal government." "But we have Benjamin Cole's testimony tomorrow," Catherine reminded them, "and the original survey maps. If Judge Parker accepts them as evidence," Harrington qualified, "Blackwood's attorney will argue they're inadmissible as newly discovered documents." As they discussed strategy for the following day, Thomas noticed a familiar figure approaching, Sheriff McIntyre. "Thought you should know," the lawman said quietly. 3 of Blackwood's men left town heading toward Copper Springs right after court adjourned. Looked like they were in a hurry. The implication was clear. With Thomas and his key supporters in Tucson, the mine was vulnerable. "I need to send word to Joseph," Thomas said urgently. "They may be planning to seize the mine while we're tied up in court." "I can dispatch a rider immediately," McIntyre offered, surprising them with his support. "Got a deputy who can make good time." As the sheriff departed on this mission, Thomas exchanged worried glances with Catherine. The legal battle was merely one front in Blackwood's campaign. Even if they prevailed in court, would there be anything left to claim when they returned? The second day of the hearing began with tension hanging thick in the courtroom. Thomas touched his father's medicine bundle for strength as Judge Parker called the proceedings to order. "Mr. Harrington, you may cross-examine Mr. Blackwood," the judge directed. Harrington approached with measured confidence. "Mr. Blackwood, You testified that your company conducted extensive geological surveys of the area before Mr. Redwater began working the mine. Is that correct? Yes, thorough surveys, Blackwood confirmed from the witness stand. Found nothing of commercial value. Interesting, Harrington said, examining a document. I have here assay reports from samples taken by your company dated March 1883, showing significant gold content in quartz samples from Thunder's spine. Blackwood shifted slightly. Minor traces, not commercially viable concentrations. Yet these reports indicate values exceeding $50 per ton, Harrington countered. Well above the threshold your company typically considers profitable. As Harrington methodically exposed inconsistencies in Blackwood's testimony, Thomas noticed Catherine slip out of the courtroom briefly. When she returned minutes later, her slight nod conveyed that she had received some communication, hopefully news from the mine. After Blackwood stepped down, looking considerably less confident, Harrington called Benjamin Cole to the stand. Mr. Cole, please tell the court about the survey maps you recently discovered, Harrington requested. Cole, nervous but determined, described finding his father's original survey documents from 1863. My father was part of the first territorial survey team after the reservation was established, he explained. These are his original field notes and maps. And what do these documents show regarding the mine's location? They clearly place Thunder's spine and the mine within the reservation boundaries as originally established, Cole testified. The landmarks are unmistakable. When Cole produced the yellowed maps, Blackwood's attorney immediately objected. Your Honor, these documents weren't disclosed during discovery. We haven't had opportunity to authenticate them. Mr. Cole, Judge Parker interjected. When precisely did these documents come into your possession? I found them 3 weeks ago, Your Honor, after hearing about this dispute. They were in a trunk of my father's effects I hadn't examined since his passing. After considering the objection, Judge Parker allowed the maps as evidence but noted he would consider their late introduction when weighing credibility. The morning's most dramatic moment came when Harrington called an unexpected witness, Robert Finch, a former surveyor for Territorial Mining Company. Mr. Finch, in your capacity as chief surveyor for Mr. Blackwood's company, were you ever instructed to adjust boundary markers? Harrington asked. Finch, a thin man with nervous hands, glanced at Blackwood before answering. Yes, sir. In 1879, I was directed to establish new reference points for the reservation boundary. For what purpose? Mr. Blackwood had identified potential mining sites along the border. He instructed me to ensure those sites appeared to fall on public land. Blackwood's attorney erupted in objections, but the damage was done. Judge Parker's expression remained impassive, but his attention had clearly sharpened. During the midday recess, Catherine pulled Thomas and Harrington aside. Joseph sent word. Blackwood's men tried to enter the mine last night. Michael and the others drove them off, but they're expecting more trouble. Can they hold out? Thomas asked. Joseph believes so, but they're outnumbered. Harrington considered this news. We need to finish today if possible. I'll request an expedited ruling. When court resumed, the proceedings took an unexpected turn. As Harrington was questioning another witness about boundary manipulations, Thomas noticed a commotion at the courtroom entrance. A young Apache man, one of those guarding the mine, entered, disheveled from hard riding. The messenger made his way to Thomas, whispering urgently in his ear. They found something at the mine, something important. Minutes later, after a hastily requested recess, Thomas examined the object the messenger had brought, a weathered stone arrowhead of distinctive Apache design. But what made this discovery extraordinary was where it had been found. Embedded in the quartz vein alongside the gold, deep within the mine tunnel. This proves Apache people worked this site generations ago, Thomas realized, before any European or American claims. Harrington's eyes lit with understanding. Physical evidence of ancestral connection to the specific mining site. When court reconvened, Harrington requested permission to present newly discovered evidence. Despite vigorous objections from Blackwood's attorney, Judge Parker allowed it, clearly intrigued. The arrowhead was presented with testimony from the Apache worker who had discovered it. "It was embedded in the quartz, Your Honor," he explained. "Not dropped there recently, but trapped when the vein formed long ago." As the final witness of the day, Thomas himself took the stand. Rather than focusing solely on legal technicalities, Harrington asked him to explain how he had located the gold where others had failed. "My grandfather showed me Thunder's spine when I was a boy," Thomas testified. "He taught me that our ancestors had found yellow metal there centuries ago, but considered the location sacred rather than a source of wealth." "And how did you determine where to dig when previous miners had found nothing valuable?" "I followed the tribal map," Thomas answered simply. "Where modern geology saw random formations, our ancestors recognized patterns. The fault line they called Thunder's Spine, where the gold-bearing quartz was formed." Thomas described how he had angled his tunnel differently, following the ancient knowledge rather than conventional mining wisdom. As he spoke, he noticed several jurors nodding with growing respect. In his closing statement, Harrington wove together their multiple lines of evidence: the original boundary survey, the Spanish land grants' alignment with Apache traditions, the physical evidence of ancestral presence, and the documented manipulation of later surveys. "Your Honor," he concluded, "this case ultimately concerns whether the law recognizes only one type of knowledge and ownership, or whether it can accommodate the truth that this land's history didn't begin with American acquisition or even Spanish colonization." As Judge Parker adjourned court to consider his ruling, Thomas felt a cautious optimism. They had presented a compelling case, but in a legal system that had rarely acknowledged Apache rights, would it be enough? The afternoon sun slanted through the courthouse windows as Judge Parker returned to the bench, his expression giving no hint of his decision. The courtroom fell silent, the tension almost tangible as he arranged his papers. "In the matter of competing claims to the mining property known as redemption," he began, "this court has considered extensive evidence regarding boundary determinations, prior rights, and conflicting surveys." Thomas sat perfectly still, aware of Catherine's presence directly behind him and Blackwood's imposing figure across the aisle. "The law governing such disputes is complex," Judge Parker continued. "We have Spanish colonial grants predating American acquisition, executive orders establishing reservation boundaries, and mining laws designed to encourage development of natural resources. When these authorities conflict, the court must determine which has precedence." The judge referenced several precedents before focusing on the specific evidence presented. "The court finds the testimony regarding deliberate manipulation of boundary surveys particularly troubling. Mr. Finch's admission that he was directed to adjust markers to place valuable sites on public land constitutes a serious violation of surveying ethics and possibly criminal fraud." Blackwood shifted uncomfortably as the judge continued. "Regarding the Spanish land grant, the court finds sufficient evidence to confirm Mrs. Wilcox's inheritance of valid title through her late husband's lineage. The grant predates both American acquisition and reservation establishment, creating superior claim under ordinary circumstances." Thomas felt a momentary sinking sensation until the judge added, "However, the discovery of Apache artifacts embedded within the mineral vein itself presents compelling evidence of indigenous use predating even Spanish claims. This physical connection, combined with the original reservation boundary survey placing the site clearly within Apache territory, creates an unusual convergence of interests." Judge Parker looked directly at Thomas and Catherine. "The court understands that Mrs. Wilcox and Mr. Redwater have proposed a joint arrangement benefiting both Mrs. Wilcox personally and the broader Apache community. This solution appears equitable given the overlapping claims." After addressing several technical points of law, Judge Parker delivered his ruling. "The court hereby recognizes the validity of Mr. Redwater's mining claim based on continuous occupation, development, and location within the original reservation boundaries as properly surveyed. This recognition is conditional upon establishment of the proposed trust, with 20% of proceeds benefiting Mrs. Wilcox as partial recognition of her inherited Spanish grant, and 30% allocated for community improvements on the Apache reservation." Thomas exhaled slowly as the judge continued. "Mr. Blackwood's claim is rejected. on grounds that the boundary adjustments upon which it relies were improperly and fraudulently executed. The Department of Interior's assertion that mineral lands were excluded from the reservation grant is similarly rejected, as no such exclusion appears in the original executive order's text. Judge Parker added one final, significant condition. To ensure proper administration of the community proceeds, the court requires establishment of a formal oversight committee including both Apache representatives and territorial officials. Annual accounting will be submitted to this court for review. The gavel fell with finality. Thomas had won, not completely but substantially. The mine was his to operate, with obligations to both Catherine and his community that he had already embraced willingly. Blackwood's face darkened with barely controlled fury as he conferred with his attorney. Fletcher, who had attended despite his suspension, slipped out of the courtroom immediately. Outside on the courthouse steps, well-wishers surrounded Thomas and Catherine. Harrington accepted congratulations on their victory while explaining the legal implications to journalists. The judge's decision creates an important precedent, he told the gathered reporters. It acknowledges that indigenous knowledge, in this case, the Apache understanding of Thunder's spine, has value equivalent to modern scientific methods. As the crowd dispersed, Sheriff McIntyre approached. "Congratulations, Redwater. Can't say I expected this outcome when you first took over that worthless mine." "Thank you for your help, Sheriff," Thomas replied. "What will happen with Blackwood's men who tried to seize the mine?" "Already handled," McIntyre assured him. "Arrested 2 of them this morning based on testimony from your workers. Blackwood will deny involvement, of course." After the sheriff departed, Thomas found a moment alone with Catherine. "You could have claimed it all," he said quietly. "The Spanish grant might have given you complete ownership." Catherine smiled. "That was never what this was about, Thomas. Not for me." "What was it about, then?" Her eyes held his. "Justice. Proving that different traditions of knowledge could both be right, your ancestors' understanding of the land and my husband's scientific approach. They were describing the same truth from different perspectives." Thomas nodded, profoundly moved by her insight. "The first brick of the new reservation school will be laid next month," he said. "I'd be honored if you'd place it." "I'd be honored to continue teaching there," she replied. Their moment was interrupted by Harrington, who approached with practical concerns. "We should return to Copper Springs immediately," he advised. "Blackwood isn't one to accept defeat graciously, and there's still gold in that mine." As they prepared for the journey home, Thomas glanced back at the courthouse. The territorial justice system had acknowledged Apache rights in this instance, a rare victory. But he harbored no illusions about the challenges ahead. Establishing the trust, ensuring fair treatment, protecting the mine's operation, all would require continued vigilance. Yet for the first time, he allowed himself to fully envision what might now be possible. Clean water flowing to the reservation, proper medical care for his people, education that honored both traditional knowledge and modern skills. Thunder's Spine's gold could transform decades of deprivation into opportunity, if managed wisely. 6 months after Judge Parker's ruling, the transformation of both the mine and the reservation was evident to anyone visiting Copper Springs. The once abandoned shaft had become a properly engineered operation employing 15 Apache workers trained in modern mining techniques. A small processing facility allowed for initial refining on-site, increasing the value of shipments sent to Phoenix. Thomas stood with Catherine on the ridge overlooking both the mine and the distant reservation, where new construction was clearly visible. The water system was nearly complete, its main pipeline gleaming in the afternoon sun as it carried mountain spring water to the parched community lands. "The clinic foundation is finished," Thomas noted, pointing to another construction site. "The doctor from Phoenix has agreed to visit weekly once it's complete." Catherine smiled. "And the school expansion will be ready for the fall term. I've already ordered new books and scientific equipment." Their professional partnership had evolved into something deeper over the months of working together. Though neither had explicitly acknowledged the change, their comfortable silence as they surveyed the results of their shared vision spoke volumes. The official partnership agreement, drafted by Harrington and approved by the court, rested in Thomas's cabin, its formal language establishing the legal framework for their collaboration. Beyond the specified percentages allocated to Catherine and the community, it created a decision-making structure that balanced individual and collective interests. Fletcher's replacement arrived yesterday, Catherine mentioned. A Mr. Collins. He seems genuinely interested in improving conditions. We'll see, Thomas replied, his experience having taught him caution regarding government officials. Judge Parker's oversight committee meets next week. That will be telling. As they descended toward the mine office, Joseph Redhawk approached with the day's production report. The young man had proven himself an excellent operations manager, combining traditional Apache values with rapidly acquired technical knowledge. Another good week, Joseph reported. The new tunnel is yielding even richer ore than expected. Inside the office, maps and geological surveys covered one wall, a blend of modern technical drawings and the traditional tribal map that had led to the original discovery. Thomas had insisted that both remain prominently displayed, a constant reminder of the complementary knowledge systems that had made their success possible. The afternoon brought a stream of visitors, tribal elders inspecting progress on community projects, the engineer overseeing the water system, and several Apache youths seeking employment. Thomas handled each meeting with the quiet authority that had earned him respect throughout the territory. "You've become quite the businessman," Catherine observed after the last visitor departed. Thomas smiled slightly. "Not by choice. I'd rather be working the mine itself." "Yet you manage it all remarkably well," she insisted. Few men could navigate both Apache traditions and territorial business practices so effectively. Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Sheriff McIntyre, who brought unexpected news. "Blackwood's leaving the territory," he announced, selling his holdings to Eastern investors and moving to California. Thomas raised an eyebrow. "Voluntarily?" "Not entirely," McIntyre admitted with a hint of satisfaction. "After your case exposed his survey manipulations, other claims surfaced. The territorial governor launched an investigation. Apparently, Blackwood's methods have been questionable for years." After the sheriff departed, Thomas and Catherine shared a moment of vindication. Blackwood's departure represented more than personal justice. It signaled changing attitudes about acceptable business practices in the territory. That evening, a small celebration gathered at Thomas's cabin, which had been expanded into a proper home. Chief Mongas and several elders joined Catherine, Harrington, visiting from Santa Fe, and key mine employees for a meal that bridged cultures. Traditional Apache dishes alongside Catherine's contributed recipes. As darkness fell, the conversation turned to future plans. The mine's production remained strong, with geologists estimating at least 10 years of profitable operation from the main vein alone. The Oversight Committee was functioning effectively, ensuring transparent administration of community funds. The territorial legislature is considering a bill to protect indigenous mineral rights more broadly, Harrington informed them. "Your case is being cited as precedent." Chief Mongas nodded thoughtfully. "Perhaps Thunder Spine's greatest value isn't its gold, but the path it opens for our people." Later, as guests departed, Thomas and Catherine lingered on the porch, watching distant lightning illuminate the mountains. "I received an offer to teach in Phoenix," Catherine said quietly. "A larger school, better salary." Thomas felt a sudden tension. "Will you take it?" She turned to face him. "I've already declined. My place is here, Thomas. With the reservation school. With what we're building." Her voice softened. "With you if you want that." In the gentle moonlight, Thomas took her hand. The gold band of her first marriage still encircled her finger, but its significance had evolved. No longer a barrier between them, but part of the complex history they both honored. "I want that very much," he replied simply. Their relationship, like everything else in their shared enterprise, would blend different traditions and experiences into something new, something that respected the past while creating possibilities neither could have achieved alone. As Catherine departed for her own home, soon to be moved permanently to the reservation, Thomas reflected on the journey from that first day, staring at a supposedly worthless mine. Thunder Spine had yielded far more than gold. It had revealed the power of ancestral knowledge, the possibility of justice within an unjust system, and a partnership that transcended cultural boundaries. The Apache tribal map, now framed and protected on his wall, had guided him to more than material wealth. It had led him home. 1 year after Judge Parker's ruling, the reservation hosted a gathering to commemorate the completion of the water system. Visitors from throughout the territory, including territorial officials, newspaper reporters, and curious settlers, witnessed the transformation that Thunder Spine's gold had made possible. Thomas and Catherine stood together near the newly constructed community well, where fresh mountain water flowed continuously. Their hands were clasped openly now, their marriage 3 months prior having formalized a partnership that had begun with a shared vision of justice. The reservation had blossomed under the reliable water supply. Gardens flourished where dust had previously prevailed, children played in the schoolyard of the expanded educational building, and a small but well-equipped clinic provided medical care previously unavailable within 50 miles. "Mr. Redwater," called a reporter from the Phoenix Gazette, "would you pose with your wife for a photograph? The story of Thunder's Spine Mine has captured interest as far east as Chicago." Thomas normally avoided such attention, but today was different. This gathering wasn't about him personally but about what could be accomplished when indigenous knowledge was respected and resources were justly allocated. He and Catherine positioned themselves before the mine's new office building, where a diverse group of Apache employees and community members joined them. The photographer instructed everyone to hold still as he prepared his equipment. Thomas stood proudly in a suit that combined Western styling with traditional Apache elements, a visual representation of his success in navigating both worlds without surrendering his identity. "This photograph will show what's possible," the reporter commented as the camera's flash powder ignited. An Apache-owned mining operation, a functioning water system, new buildings. It contradicts everything most Easterners believe about reservation life. After the formal ceremonies, Thomas walked with a group of young Apache men toward the mine. These teenagers, once facing limited prospects, now apprenticed in various aspects of mining operations, learning skills that would remain valuable long after Thunder Spine's gold was exhausted. "Show me again how you found it," requested 16-year-old Daniel Strongheart, the most promising of the apprentices. Thomas removed the tribal map from its protective case. Though he now possessed modern geological surveys of exceptional detail, he continued using this ancestral document as his primary reference. The young men gathered around, listening intently as he explained how to interpret the ancient markings. "Our ancestors understood this land in ways modern science is only beginning to comprehend," Thomas explained. "They recognized patterns in rock formations, plant growth, water movement, signs that point to what lies beneath. But you also use the new methods," Daniel observed, gesturing toward the modern mining equipment. Thomas nodded. "Both approaches have value. Together, they reveal more than either could alone." He carefully refolded the map. "That's the most important lesson of Thunder's Spine. Not just where to find gold, but how different kinds of knowledge can work together." Later, as the celebration continued with traditional Apache music and dancing, Catherine joined Thomas on the ridge overlooking the transformed community. The setting sun cast long shadows across land that now supported genuine prosperity rather than mere survival. "Your grandfather would be proud," Catherine said softly. "His teachings led to all of this." Thomas gazed at the reservation, where lights began twinkling as dusk approached. The water system's main pipeline gleamed in the fading light, a lifeline connecting mountain springs to the community below. Near the school, children played on new equipment, while adults gathered for evening social activities. "He always said the land would provide if we remembered how to listen," Thomas replied. "For generations, our people were told to forget the old ways, to abandon traditions as primitive and worthless." He turned to Catherine. "You were the first outsider to truly see the value in what my grandfather taught me. Perhaps because my husband's scientific work had already shown me that Western knowledge doesn't have all the answers," she suggested. "Jonathan would have been fascinated by how you combined approaches." As darkness settled over the reservation, Thomas reflected on the journey that had brought them here. What had begun with mockery "You're crazy to accept that broken mine," had transformed not just his own circumstances but an entire community's prospects. Beyond the material improvements, there was a renewed sense of possibility among his people, a recognition that Apache traditions contained wisdom worth preserving. The territorial governor had recently appointed Thomas to a commission on indigenous resource rights, an acknowledgement that his success at Thunder Spine represented more than an isolated anomaly. Other tribes throughout the territory were now asserting their own claims to valuable resources, citing Judge Parker's precedent-setting ruling. Thomas took Catherine's hand as they descended toward the celebration. The path ahead would undoubtedly hold challenges, but Thunder Spine had proven that with wisdom, perseverance, and respect for different traditions, even the most entrenched systems could be changed. Sometimes, the richest veins were found precisely where others had stopped looking.